with the rising cost of living and not the wages to match, many people are finding themselves in more and more debt. They're stressing about how they'll make it through the week, let alone the month. With me, I have the Director of External Affairs at Christians Against Poverty, or CAP, Gareth McNab. Good morning.
Good morning, Cassandra.
How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. I appreciate you having me.
I appreciate you coming on. So I really wanted to get someone on from your organization in specific, because obviously we are a Christian place and you are Christians Against Poverty. And I wanted to just dig into the finances, but also the Christian aspect of it as well. So for starters, a lot of people, we find it quite difficult to address our finances. Why do you think this is?
I think it's really complex. But if I broke it down, I think there are probably four main reasons that many people struggle with addressing their finances, and some of them I resonate with. I think the first one that's really powerful is alongside money comes a lot of really deep and powerful emotions. When we ask our clients when they come to us, how long did you wait before you came to get help? Half of them have waited more than a year after first realizing they had a problem to seeking help from us. A quarter, it's more than 3 years. And when we ask them why, the most common reasons are, I thought I should be able to sort it out myself. And then fear, shame, guilt, even anger at either the situation they were in or their inability to cope, or their perception of their inability to cope. But these emotions are really powerful things, aren't they? And they do in all aspects of our life. If we're fearful of something, or we feel a sense of shame about ourselves or our situation, they really can be blockers to taking steps and making progress in any part of our life, and especially money, because it's just so powerful. So those emotions are a powerful brake against us making progress. There is a question of skills at times, although often that would be the first one that people would say. When you ask people who've experienced financial difficulty, what one thing do you think would have made a difference? They commonly say, money education in schools. I wish I'd had more financial education. And yet, ironically, our experience of providing budgeting help to many, many people is that the households on the lowest incomes are some of the most expert budgeters in the country. Because when you have to manage your money down to the last penny, not only the last pound, and as you said, when you're managing week by week, not month to month, actually you do know where every single penny of yours is, where it's supposed to go, where it's coming from. And that's exactly why you're so fearful, because you know that the maths doesn't work. And so there is a skills aspect to it. But my challenge to listeners would be, don't let this be the first thing that you think of as to why people struggle with money. And so those skills can include numeracy. So not just not feeling like you're good with money, but actually being not good with numbers, the actual maths and the physical things, the numbers themselves. There was some research a few years ago that suggested that up to 1 in 30 adults experiences some level of number anxiety. And that doesn't mean that they're not numerate, that they don't know how to count or do maths, but it means that they're so uncomfortable around numbers that it causes them an emotional response, such that 1 in 30 adults thinks twice before they get in a lift. They'd rather take the stairs than have to look at the numbers on the wall and choose a button for a floor they're going to take. Now, if 1 in 30 adults, that's the equivalent of a child in every classroom. If their interaction with numbers is causing them that level of anxiety that they would choose to take stairs over a lift, then it's not right for us to suggest that it's their budgeting that's a problem, is it? There's something deeper that actually some element of compassion and community should be able to come alongside. So emotions and skills. And then the two others that I'd say, there are situations that make addressing finances particularly challenging. If your finances are involved in a relationship, maybe it's the first time you've shared your finances with another person. That's tricky, working out who's going to pay for what, who's not going to pay for what. Are you going to have a joint bank account? Are you going to keep things separate? That's tricky enough. But then you get the power imbalances of what happens if you're from quite a traditional background where maybe the husband or the man will run the finances and will distribute allowances, or maybe it's the other way depending on your culture. Maybe the mother or the matriarch is the keeper of the finances. Challenging those power structures in families can be really hard, and it can perpetuate a gap in skills or experience in managing the money. And there can be abusive environments and situations when money is withheld or rationed or doled out as a power, as a control thing, and that's terrible and it's endemic. then there are some complex and chaotic living situations. How do you manage your money well if where you're sleeping week to week is not fixed or certain? If you're sharing with friends, maybe you're sofa surfing, maybe you're living in large mixed occupancy houses, sharing with numbers of other people, singles or couples, and just it's really hard to get any privacy or even make sure you're getting all your post. Like these are real and understandable reasons, aren't they? And then finally, there is a resources question. To get on top of your money, you do need the time. Low-income households are commonly already working 2 jobs, not all of them always paid. For example, you may be blending a low-income job with caring responsibilities or family responsibilities that I've got 3 kids and I know how hard it can be to sometimes feel like I can get a break. But how on earth would that happen if I wasn't sharing the parenting responsibilities with my wife? A large proportion of our clients are single parents. And so if you're working and caring and parenting or caring for an older relative, where exactly is this time going to come from to sit and get all your bank statements together? And like, that's not
It's
easy.
a lot. It's a lot of effort going into it. I think you made some really great points there, Gareth, especially the anxiety one, because that isn't, I think, something that a lot of people know. I guess if you don't deal with that, you would never assume that people would choose to take the stairs over getting in a lift. For a lot of us, that's just, oh yeah, get in a lift. But that is such valid points, especially the time. Yeah, really great points there. So when people come to you after a year and a half or 3 years or however long it's been, what do you do to help them? What's your first point of call?
Great question. So Christians Against Poverty, we provide a number of services. The first that we started and probably the biggest, the one we're probably best known for, would be our CAP Debt Help. Our debt advice service. So this is the free debt advice that's accredited by the Money and Pension Service, that is regulated by the FCA, the Finance Conduct Authority. So it's top quality, well-regulated free debt advice. If you're coming to us for help with your debts, you'd be giving us a call and speaking to our friendly colleagues in our new inquiries team in Bradford, and they would find out from you, hey, what's made you call us today? Tell us about your situation. Most people will pile straight in to talk about their money or their debt problems. We'll want to keep the conversation open around, but tell us what else is going on. How does this feel for you? Because we understand that debt problems are rarely a problem in and of themselves. They're often a symptom of wider challenges or wider difficulties that people are facing. And so we'll want to demonstrate the love of God in listening to their situation and demonstrating some compassion. You can try and address debt as a problem, as a maths problem, and just stick numbers in spreadsheets until it adds up properly at the bottom. But that's not what we do, because you're human. You're not a problem to be solved. You're a person to be loved and cared for and loved back into health and fullness. And so we want to understand that. So that's the front bit. What we then do is we'll put you in touch with a debt centre in your local area, because we work in partnership with a local church right across all 4 nations of the UK, because we want to be able to demonstrate that love and compassion in community, not just as a disembodied voice on the end of the phone, however lovely all of my colleagues are and how hard they work to demonstrate that compassion and love for all the callers. Actually, it's when a debt centre manager or a debt coach, a volunteer from the local church, along with somebody else, because safeguarding is important to us, so we come to people's homes in twos, we'll sit in somebody's front room. We will ask them to get out the bin bag or the drawer where all the bills have been going. And we'll get there. We'll explain our service to you at a second visit. We'll go through all of those bills and bank statements and work with you to construct a budget to understand what's coming in and what's supposed to be going out. We're not just a debt advice service. We are Christians who are against poverty. And so it's really important to us that we always keep sight of the person, and also that the individual keeps sight of their own personhood, because those emotions, that fear, that shame, that stigma, they chip away at our insides, don't they? Our souls, our very who we are. And actually looking someone in the eye and telling them that they're loved, that they're valuable, that there's always hope, man, that does miracles. It really does miracles. It can transform lives. And that powerful and prophetic offer of the promise of hope that's available to all of us is one of the most powerful messages that we've got, as well as our skills in helping people get debt free.
I think that's amazing. It makes me want to, I mean, I'm not in debt, but it makes me want to call up and get some advice. We are going to talk about what advice you can maybe give someone that is struggling, but I do want to move on to the Christian aspect of it. So being a Christian and having a lot of Christians in my life, I've noticed that a lot of Christians, we don't discuss money because it's the root of all evil, or you know, it's difficult for a rich man to get into heaven. So a lot of Christians will not really touch the money topic.
Mm.
What does the Bible say about our finances, and how to actually manage them? And why do some Christians need to get over that thing of, you know, just never discussing money? Just kind of, you know, you give your tithes, so you give your offering, and you don't discuss it. It's just you put it in a box. And is that honestly, how do we get over that? And what does the Bible say about money?
Oh, what a great question. So you raised two really important things. I think you're right. I think Christians do often run scared of the money thing. And yet the scriptures do mention responsible or faithful use of the resources that God, our Father, gave us as a gift. And so pastors, preachers, teachers, leaders everywhere would do well to get to grips with how to talk about money in a way that doesn't threaten or patronize or boss people around. When I read the scriptures, that's not the voice of my Father that I hear. I hear a loving, tender, compassionate Father who's given me all good gifts, not an oppressing, challenging, hold me to account, harsh taskmaster. I don't recognize that image of God in the scriptures. But it's not just Christians who struggle with money. Humans everywhere do, for all kinds of reasons. It seems to be particularly powerful in Britain and in white Western society in particular, where we used to never talk about money, sex, or politics. Two of those I think we're increasingly happy to talk about, but money's the last one, right? Like, we're quite happy to, since Brexit and Partygate and all that kind of thing, the world and his wife has a view on political things, and the world of sex and relationships is opening right up with very strongly held views that people aren't too shy in expressing either anymore. But money seems to be the last bastion of where the enemy has got his grips on what people are prepared to talk to one another about. Because it's when we feel alone that these things get more power over us, isn't it? It's when we are isolated and cut off from brothers and sisters and community that our own minds and the enemy can have their way. And so it's a problem that I think Christians everywhere share, but it's also not only because of our faith. Now, what does the Bible say about finances? I think that's a really interesting question too, because it says different things to different people depending on what finances you have.
Okay.
And we read it differently, don't we? And I think this is true about all scripture. Actually, you've got to check what glasses you've got on when you read the scriptures, because actually my experience of talking to Christians from all kinds of faith backgrounds around money is there's a group of people who will zoom in on the verses about the man who won't work for a living, or the man who isn't providing for his family is worse than an unbeliever. And I'm not denying those verses are there. It's just interesting to me that there's a set of verses that you go to if you want to make the situation somebody's in the individual's responsibility. And there's a set of verses you'd look at if you want to acknowledge actually the community's responsibility, one for another. And so you'd look to different places. And so that's why I say the Bible says different things. I mean, in part, it's because of the different glasses. The typical white Western worldview is quite individualistic. And so the verses that say how I, as an individual, should manage my money and my household, they're the verses that are going to pop off the page to me. And I'm going to read past the ones that are written with a community feel more in mind. But if you're from a different church tradition or from another culture or race, the verses about the community and the family may pop out quite a lot more quickly to you than they do to me. And this is why the Bible was never meant to be read alone. It was always designed to be read in community, wasn't it? That's our faith. That's why an individual Christian is in a weaker position than the one who's committed to a local church, because this opportunity we have to share the gift of the insight the Spirit gives us into the scriptures one with another is so helpful. It means that I can help you with your blind spots, Cassandra, and you can help me with mine, and together we can grow in God. And so my challenge to believers everywhere would be, what does the Bible say about finances? Look, unless you've read the Bible in community with others, and especially people who are from a different background to you, then you haven't seen everything the scriptures have to say about finances. And I think the key one that I draw out would be, there are those verses around wisdom, around the wise stewardship of your resources, the challenge to which is about the hoarding of finances. And so for every verse there is about be wise, make provision for yourself, work hard. These are all decent biblical principles, But if in doing so you are hoarding wealth for yourself, Jesus himself has some very powerful challenges for you about your lack of trust in your Father, who has made provision for the birds and the flowers of the field. And so how much more will he not look after you? And that's not to encourage profligacy or just sowing your money to the wind. Like, wise stewardship is a good and godly principle. But so also is that he sets the lonely into families. So also is that his design for the good of that's from Deuteronomy, isn't it? That was the principle of Jubilee and of the Sabbath year, that God's people in Israel, it looks like they never actually instituted properly. And that's kind of why they were exiled for as long as they were. But then in Acts 2, 4, and 6, we see the community of believers called the church, for the first time ever, knowing no poverty among them, because they shared what they had one with another. They didn't consider their own resources to be their individuals. They considered them to belong to the group for the good, for the commonwealth, for the good of all. And then they started to make provision for the communities in which they were living in. And so I think the Bible does teach good stewardship, faithful stewardship of our resources, because they're not ours, they're from God. So they're not for waste, they're for investing in his plans and purposes. But his plans and purposes aren't just for you as an individual to prosper or to grow. They're for you as part of a community to meet one another's needs. And in doing so, partnering with him in making provision for those who have less. And so that's why I think it's a great question, but it's a big question that gets to what's the church for? And how do we read the scriptures at all, yet alone about an issue as powerful and challenging sometimes as money? I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to go a bit deeper into it if you.
No,
if
it's very helpful. We're gonna have to book a whole nother interview just to talk about that one, that one question. But I think what you said makes complete sense, Gareth. It does. We're not meant to read it alone. So if you are reading it alone, maybe you'll have different views on what it says. So back to what's happening in now. So the cost of living is rising. A lot of people, their energy bills have shot up by so much. If someone right now is listening in, or they've watched this video and they've thought, okay, what do I do? What advice would you give to someone that is in that position and they're struggling?
Right. So I can give you a couple of tips, and then I can point you to a couple of other places, and then I can get to a deep principle. So the couple of tips would be, look, the common budgeting help that we'd give anybody who grabbed me in the pub one night and said, "Oh, Gareth, I'm struggling," would be things like, well, first of all, how can you cut your costs? Of the things that you are paying out, how could you get those same things a bit cheaper? And that's where looking around to switch your energy bills, your broadband bills, and so on was the first key thing that any budgeting help would encourage you to do. In the current energy crisis, actually, the advice is don't try and switch your energy bill. There's no savings to be had there, but there can be savings to be had on other regular outgoings. Then the next thing would be, of what you're paying out on, what could you cut back? And so if, like I used to be before the pandemic, if you were used to Friday night as takeaway night, does every Friday need to be takeaway night? I put on a lot of weight during the pandemic, Cassandra. I
Didn't we all?
For different reasons, I needed to cut back on my Friday night takeaway. But so it's not necessarily stop spending. Sometimes it can be, well, of the things that you enjoy, but maybe you're feeling the pinch on, how might you cut back and get the same, but get it less often? And then looking through your regular outgoings to see, what can you cut out? Is there something actually that you can, while still achieving your family's priorities, that you can cut out? So again, the pandemic is a good example. Early on, I took up a couple of hobbies to try and get me through the early isolation of we're all at home. Some of those hobbies included some subscriptions that actually now our society has begun to open up. I could look again and go, do I really need that? I started reading a lot of news. I took out a couple of news subscriptions. I don't need to be paying £8 a month for that anymore, and £12 a month for that. And if you go through, it's surprising how quickly those things can add up. And so where can you cut costs? Where can you cut back? And what could you cut out? They're the basic tenets. But the challenge is low-income households have probably already done most of those things. And so if you find that those 3 tips aren't sufficient for you, then no shame, no judgment. Actually, the cost of living crisis, Martin Lewis himself has said he's run out of tools to help people with. And if Mr. Personal Finance, Mr. Money Saving Expert, has run out of tools, then this cost of living crisis is more than any of us can overcome as individuals. We are going to need to see the systems and structures that we live in change to ensure that people on low incomes and living in poverty are cared for. There is some support around in terms of the local councils in England, Wales and Scotland have been granted money from the government for the Household Support Fund. So there was £500 million given in the spring statement from the beginning of April to local authorities that you can approach this if you're in difficulty, approaching them and saying, I want to know what this Household Support Fund will cover. The difficulty with that is that depending where you live, there's different help available for you. So it can feel a bit like a postcode lottery. And some of the help is more like a one-off help you in a crisis. But what we know from the cost of living crisis is it's not a one-off bill that I'm terrified about. It's my ability to keep paying this bill for the rest of the year that I now can't afford. And so the help for the crisis is definitely there. But we do need more help from the government in terms of those ongoing costs. So we will keep lobbying, campaigning. Please join us in keeping praying for change there. But the key underlying principle is get help. Don't do it alone. Don't let shame and fear win and rob you of hope. Local authorities, Christians Against Poverty, a friend or somebody else in your congregation, speak about it, get it out in the light and rob it of its power and sharing God's provision of hope. The other thing that I would say is that there's people listening who aren't in the difficulty, who actually my message to you would be, also don't let your brother or sister have to ask you. Offer help. And that might be offering money to your church for a community fund or things like that. It might be donating to ministries like Christians Against Poverty to enable services to reach people on low incomes, but just starting the conversation. If we know that as many as 6.5 million people are in fuel poverty right now, there's a reasonable chance that a large proportion of people in your own congregation are experiencing this. And we can model the desire to strip money of its fear and power and shame and stigma by starting conversations within our communities. Pastors, church leaders, people in positions of power, community leaders have a great opportunity to open up the conversation about money and let it be a thing that doesn't have fear and shame around it. Let it be a thing where in our community, we want it to be one where people are free to ask for and offer help, because it's the health of the whole community that any one of us actually thrives in. So that's how I would go. I'd say you've got your cut costs, cut back, cut out. You've got local authorities, local councils for help, but don't do it alone. Ask for help. And if you're not in a position of needing it, then start the conversation yourself about what help you can be in your local communities, which might be your local church. It might be your local church reaching out to the community in which God's placed you to help friends and neighbours too.
That's wonderful advice, Gareth. We recently did an article actually for Premier Christianity magazine, I believe, and it did say churches may really need your help right now with the rise of cost of everything. So maybe do reach out to those. And yeah, I love that advice. That is really wonderful. Hopefully that will help someone listening in. So to round off then, if someone is listening and we're listening right now, how do we get in contact with CAP? What are your web address? Where can we find you?
Yeah, if you're looking for us on the internet, it's capuk.org, capuk.org, and you'll see on our homepage, nice and clear, top right corner, how to get free debt help, and details of some of our other services. If you want to call us, it's a free phone number. It's 0800 328 0006, and I think it's 9:30 till 5 on weekdays we're available. So yeah, do get in touch. If you're a little bit nervous and not sure, or you're interested in who else can help, the Money and Pension Service, the government department responsible for providing free debt advice right across the UK, has a Money Helper website. That's their branded service with a lot of tips about how you can look after your money. And if you search Money and Pension Service Debt Advice Locator, if you're interested in debt advice in your local area, pop in your postcode and it'll tell you debt advice services that you can engage with and trust in your local area. If there's a CAP service in your area, you'll find it there too. But if you want to contact us, 0800 328 0006.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You've provided a lot of insight. I'm sure the Premier Gospel audience will get a lot from what you've said.
My pleasure, Cassandra. Thanks.